Good evening, little birds. Welcome to the library. Tonight's true tale takes us from our cozy hollow to the crowded streets of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518. A city of timber-framed houses, church bells, narrow lanes, and anxious whispers. A city already worn thin by hunger, sickness, and fear. I'm Caspian Crow, and this is the true tale of the dancing plague of 1518. In July of that year, Strasbourg was a free city within the Holy Roman Empire in the region of Alsace. And on one ordinary summer day, something extraordinary began in the street. A woman, remembered only by history as Frau Trophäa, stepped outside her home and began to dance. There was no festival, no wedding procession, no musician playing in the square. She simply began to move, twisting, turning, shaking, dancing silently in the street as though compelled by a rhythm no one else could hear. At first, perhaps, her neighbors were only confused. Perhaps they laughed. Perhaps they muttered that she had lost her senses. But Frau Trophäa did not stop. She danced for hours and then longer. Her body wore down. Her feet ached. Eventually, she collapsed from exhaustion. But after resting, she rose and began again. For days she continued. And then the strangest part of the tale began. Others joined her. Within a week, more than 30 people were said to be dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. Not joyfully, not playfully, but desperately, compulsively, and seemingly against their will. The afflicted danced until their bodies gave out. Some staggered, some cried out, some collapsed, only to rise again and continue. By August, the number may have reached into the hundreds. Some accounts claim the dancers bled from their feet. Others say they fell from hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. The city's authorities were alarmed, and with good reason. Whatever was happening, it was spreading. But no one knew what it was. Physicians were consulted. At first, they rejected the idea that the dancers were possessed or cursed. Instead, they blamed hot blood, a medical theory of the time. The dancers, they believed, had too much heat within their bodies, and that heat had to be released. Their solution was simple. The dancers should dance more. Dreadful as such a prescription was, the people of Strasbourg were desperate. And so, the city opened spaces for the afflicted to continue. Guild halls were made available. Musicians were hired. Professional dancers were brought in to help keep the victims moving, as if the sickness could be exhausted from their bodies. But the plan did not cure the plague. Instead, it fed it. The music drew attention. The dancing became public, and the outbreak seemed only to grow worse. More people joined. More people collapsed. And while later accounts describe deaths from exhaustion, strokes, or heart attacks, the exact number of fatalities remains uncertain to this day. Some historians believe the death toll may have been exaggerated over time. Others argue that whatever the final number was, small or large, the danger was very real. Because by then, Strasbourg was no longer dealing with one troubled woman in the street. It was facing a citywide terror. When it was clear that the original plan failed, the explanation began to change. Perhaps this was not hot blood after all. Perhaps it was a punishment. Perhaps the dancers had offended Saint Vitus, a saint who, in parts of medieval and early modern Europe, was believed to have the power to afflict sinners with uncontrollable dancing. So, the city changed its approach. Music and public dancing were banned. The afflicted were taken away from the streets and sent to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus. There, they prayed for mercy and absolution. And then, in September, the outbreak began to fade. Almost as suddenly as it had appeared, the dancing plague came to an end. But the mystery remained. What had happened in Strasbourg? One theory points to ergot, an exotic mold that can grow on damp rye. Ergot poisoning can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and terrible sickness. Since rye bread was a common food, it is easy to see why the idea has survived. Perhaps the people of Strasbourg ate contaminated grain, and their bodies reacted in horrifying ways. But just as with Salem in the late 17th century, there are problems with that explanation. Ergot poisoning can make people violently ill, but it does not easily explain how so many could dance for days, or why they would all suffer the exact same strange compulsion in the exact same public way. Another theory is stranger and, in many ways, more unsettling. Mass psychogenic illness, what older sources often call mass hysteria. In other words, the dancing plague may have been born not from poison, but from fear. Consider, Strasbourg in 1518 was under immense strain. Disease had stalked the region. Famine had left people hungry and desperate. Religious fears were deeply woven into daily life. Many believed in curses, saints, divine punishment, and invisible forces that could reach into the body itself. In such a world, one woman's strange dancing may have become a spark of fear, and soon the city was swept up in a wildfire of terror. Now, it is important to note that this does not make the dancing plague less real. If anything, it makes it more disturbing, because the victims were not pretending. They were not performing. Something in them had broken loose, and the result was visible to everyone. It's also worth mentioning that the dancing plague of 1518 was not the only outbreak of its kind. Similar episodes of dancing mania had been reported in parts of Europe before, especially along the Rhine. But Strasbourg's outbreak became the most famous, the image of a city seized by a dance it could not stop. And so, the final mystery remains. What truly moved those people? Was it sickness, starvation, death, fear, or some terrible mixture of all of them? One thing remains clear. The dancing plague was no simple curse, no supernatural threat. Instead, it was something far more human and perhaps far more frightening. A reminder that terror does not always come from the darkness outside the door. Sometimes it begins within ourselves. Thank you for joining me in the library, little birds. I'm Caspian Crow, and I bid you good reading.